What would you do if the person who was supposed to protect you your entire life stood in front of a room full of people and tried to erase everything you ever were? And what if the truth, the real truth, was something so big, so classified, that you couldn't say a single word to defend yourself? My name is Claire Morgan. I am 43 years old. And 9 seconds ago, my father finished telling a jury of 12 people that I am a thief. The courtroom smelled like old wood, cheap cologne, and something metallic underneath it all. The kind of smell that soaks into the walls of a building that has heard too many lies told under oath. The fluorescent lights above me buzzed at a frequency just low enough to make your teeth ache. Outside the tall windows of Loudoun County Circuit Court, October had turned the tree line a deep, burning amber. Beautiful. Completely indifferent to what was happening inside these walls. I kept both hands flat on the wooden rail in front of me. Still, deliberate. 15 years of training does not disappear just because you are sitting in a courtroom in the county where you were born. I took one slow breath. In through the nose, 4 counts. Out through the mouth, 4 counts. Exactly the way they taught us in the first week of field operations. Then I looked at the man standing 20 feet away from me, waving a manila folder at the jury like it was a battle flag. Richard Morgan, my father. 67 years old, the color of brick dust. His voice filling every corner of the room the way it always had, loud enough to make the walls feel smaller. He had run the Loudoun County Board of Supervisors for 3 terms. He was the man who decided which roads got paved, which families got respect, and which ones quietly disappeared from the conversation. To this town, Richard Morgan was the closest thing to royalty that a Virginia farming county could produce. And to him, I was the daughter who ran away, the girl who traded the Morgan family land for some vague government desk job in Washington and never looked back. He had just told 12 people, under oath, that I had not worked a single day since college, and that I was now stealing from my own mother's estate while her grave was still fresh. I did not flinch. I did not turn. I reached for the plastic cup of water in front of me, took one slow sip. Lukewarm, metallic, tasting exactly like the pipes had been rusting since this courthouse was built, and set it back down on the rail without a sound. What Richard did not know, what no one in this room knew except my attorney, Nathaniel Cross, sitting quietly at the defense table behind me, was that inside his briefcase sat a sealed black envelope. Heavy stock, red wax, the gold eagle of the Office of the Director of National Intelligence pressed into the seal. Richard had spent months building this case. He had hired investigators. He had coached witnesses. He had done everything a powerful man does when he decides to bury someone. But he had never once considered the possibility that the person he was trying to bury had been keeping secrets that could shake the foundation of this entire room. In our family, silence was never seen as discipline. It was always seen as guilt. I had been silent for 15 years, and today, that silence was about to end. Richard had barely returned to his seat before his attorney rose from the plaintiff's table, and the temperature in the room dropped another degree. Harrison Webb was the kind of lawyer who wore his confidence like a second suit. Polished shoes, a silk tie knotted just a fraction too tight, and the practiced stride of a man who had never once lost in a Loudoun County courtroom. He approached the witness stand slowly, the way a cat approaches something it has already decided is cornered. Richard Morgan had built his entire identity on one belief: that the world made sense when everyone stayed in their place. 3 terms on the Board of Supervisors had only hardened that conviction. He decided which roads got paved and which neighborhoods got overlooked. He shook the hands that mattered and ignored the ones that didn't. And when it came to women, his worldview was brutally simple. Success meant a good husband or a piece of inherited land. Anything else was just noise. I remembered the night he sat across from me at the kitchen table when I was 16 and told me, without blinking, a girl who wants to go out and conquer the world is just running away from the fact that she can't. I had not answered him then. I was answering him now, just not in a language he was ready to hear. Webb stopped 3 feet in front of me, a thin stack of papers held loosely at his side, and he smiled. "Miss Morgan," he said, his voice carrying easily to the back row of the jury box, "let's talk about your career. You claim to work for an organization called Atlantic Horizon Operations Group." He paused just long enough for the name to sound absurd. "Our investigators searched every public database available. No registered office, no corporate website, no professional profile of any kind. What we did find," he held up a single sheet of paper, "was a P.O. box at a UPS store in Arlington, Virginia." He let that image hang in the air like smoke. "Does that sound like a career to you?" Behind him, Richard sat with his arms crossed, a slow smile spreading across his face. Satisfied. Certain. I looked at Webb and kept my voice completely level. "The fact that you could not find it does not mean it does not exist," I said. "That is the boundary of your access, not a measure of my life." Richard let out a sharp laugh, loud enough for the jury to hear, designed for exactly that purpose. I did not look at him. Instead, my eyes dropped for just a moment to the bronze eagle insignia pinned to my lapel, and something shifted quietly in my chest, because I remembered another room. No windows, a hum of servers in the walls, a screen glowing blue at 2 in the morning inside a secured facility in Langley, Virginia, while I was mapping intercept data that would determine whether a field team in the Middle East came home alive. That was 15 years ago. While I was in that room making decisions that would never appear in any newspaper, Richard Morgan was sitting in a diner 4 miles from this courthouse complaining about the price of hay. Have you ever had someone look directly at you and only see the version of you they invented in their own mind? That is not blindness. That is a choice, and it is the cruelest kind. Webb had not finished with me yet, but the moment that truly broke something open in that courtroom did not come from him. It came from the gallery. I heard the bailiff call her name, and I watched my sister stand up from the 3rd row. Diane Morgan, 36 years old. 7 years younger than me, wearing a navy cashmere coat I recognized immediately. Because 2 years ago, through an anonymous gift account I had set up under a different name, I had been the one who paid for it. She walked to the witness stand with the careful, deliberate fragility of someone who had rehearsed this moment many times in front of a mirror. Her eyes were red at the edges. Her chin trembled just enough. She was playing the role of the wounded, abandoned sister, and she was playing it well. She told the jury that after our mother passed, she had gone through the financial records and found something that broke her heart. She said that over the final 18 months of our mother's life, nearly $40,000 had been withdrawn from her personal account in a series of transactions, and that the signatures on those withdrawal forms did not look like our mother's handwriting. Her voice dropped to just above a whisper when she said it. I didn't want to believe it was Claire, but the evidence was right there in front of me. The jury leaned in. I kept my face completely still. What Diane did not tell them, what she either did not know or chose not to say, was that every single dollar of that money was a direct reimbursement for the private nursing team I had hired when our mother's condition worsened, and the hospital could no longer provide adequate overnight care. Richard had refused to authorize outside help. He said he did not want strangers in the house, so I handled it quietly, the same way I had handled everything else quietly for 15 years. I had also quietly arranged a private agricultural relief grant that saved this family's horse farm in 2020, when a structural failure in the main stable nearly wiped out everything Richard had built. $158,000, routed through 3 separate holding companies, because I knew he would never accept help from me directly. I had funded Diane's graduate degree at Georgetown through an anonymous education scholarship. I had covered our mother's stage 2 cancer treatments when the insurance company denied the claim. I was the invisible hand that had kept this family standing, and now that same invisibility was being used to hang me. Webb approached the bench and submitted Exhibit 14. A forensic document analysis confirming that the signatures in question showed signs of inconsistency. Several jurors nodded slowly. I saw a woman in the second row of the jury box, a woman I recognized from the church my family attended when I was a child, turn her face slightly away from mine, as if she had already made her decision. The weight of it settled into the room like sediment dropping to the bottom of still water. I understood what was happening. They did not need more evidence. They had a story. A clean, familiar story about a selfish daughter who abandoned her family and came back only to take. And a story, once it takes root in a room like this one, is almost impossible to uproot with facts alone. Almost. The most painful thing in the world is not being betrayed by an enemy. It is watching someone you have quietly loved and protected for their entire life stand up in a room full of people and choose to become the weapon aimed directly at you. Webb had just finished asking the jury to consider the weight of the forensic evidence when Nathaniel Cross stood up, and the entire atmosphere of that room shifted in a single breath. He did not pace. He did not gesture toward the jury or adjust his posture for effect. He simply reached into his briefcase, set it on the table, and spoke in a voice so calm it made everything else in the room sound like noise. "Your Honor," he said, "the plaintiff's investigation was thorough by civilian standards, but they were searching for a person who, by federal mandate and for reasons of national security, is not permitted to appear in any public database." He reached back into the briefcase and placed a single envelope on the defense table. Heavy black stock, a red wax seal pressed with the gold eagle of the Office of the Director of National Intelligence. Harrison Webb was on his feet immediately. "Objection, Your Honor. This is a misdirection tactic. This has no relevance to a trust dispute." Judge Gerald Harmon raised one hand, and Webb stopped mid-sentence. "Sit down, Mr. Webb." Then the sound came from behind me, a chair shrieking against the hardwood floor as Richard Morgan pushed to his feet. "This is a performance," he said, his voice cracking at the edges for the first time all morning. "That girl is a file clerk. I have known her since the day she was born, and she is nobody." Harmon did not raise his voice. He did not need to. "Mr. Morgan, sit down, or I will have you removed from this courtroom." The room went completely still. Even the fluorescent lights seemed to hold their hum at a lower frequency. Harmon took the envelope and reached for the silver letter opener on his bench. That was when I noticed something change in his face. Because before he cut the seal, his eyes moved to the bronze eagle insignia on my lapel and stopped. Judge Gerald Harmon was a retired Air Force colonel with 2 tours at Joint Special Operations Command. He was not looking at my pin with curiosity. He was looking at it with recognition. I had seen that expression once before, on the face of a senior officer in a secured briefing room at Bagram Air Base in 2011, when he realized the woman sitting across the table from him held a clearance level 3 grades above his own. Harmon cut the seal slowly and deliberately, and the courtroom held its breath. He unfolded the document, read it once, then read it again. Then he removed his glasses and set them on the bench in front of him, and the silence that followed was the loudest thing I had ever heard in a room full of people. "I have before me," Harmon said, his voice carrying the full weight of someone who understood exactly what he was reading. "A verified statement of service, signed by the Director of National Intelligence." He paused and looked directly at Richard. "Claire Morgan holds the rank of Senior Intelligence Service, Level 5. For the past 15 years, she has served as Deputy Director of Strategic Operations for the Central Intelligence Agency. Atlantic Horizon Operations Group is a Tier 1 cover designation established by the Department of Defense. The gaps in her public record are not evidence of failure." He stopped. "They are evidence of an extraordinary level of service to this country." The sound that followed was not a gasp. It was something quieter and more complete. The sound of a room full of people recalibrating everything they thought they knew. Richard's jaw dropped and stayed there. Diane made a small, strangled sound and pressed both hands over her mouth. Harrison Webb looked down at the floor in front of him with the expression of a man watching his professional reputation walk out the door. There are truths that do not need to be shouted. They only need to be placed in the right room at the right moment. And then they do everything themselves. Judge Harmon did not pause for dramatic effect. He did not need to. He ordered the courtroom doors secured, transitioned the proceeding to an in-camera session, and then delivered his ruling in the same measured, unshakable tone he had used to silence Richard 20 minutes earlier. He dismissed the complaint with prejudice, meaning it could never be filed again, in any form, in any court. He sanctioned Richard Morgan in the amount of $52,000 to cover legal costs and the administrative burden placed upon the Department of Defense by a civilian proceeding that should never have reached this level. And he awarded me $65,000 in damages for defamation of character, to be paid directly from Richard's personal share of the family estate. "Mr. Morgan," Harmon said, closing the folder in front of him with quiet finality, "you constructed this case on a foundation of assumptions. That foundation has collapsed today, and you will bear the full cost of clearing the wreckage." Richard said nothing. For the first time in my memory, the man who had filled every room he had ever entered with the sheer volume of his certainty had nothing left to say. I stood up from the defense table, picked up my bag, and walked toward the gallery. I moved at the same pace I had moved for 15 years, steady, deliberate, and entirely on my own terms. As I passed the row where Richard was sitting, I did not stop, but I slowed down just enough. "You never needed to know what I did," I said, keeping my voice low and even. "But you were supposed to know who I was. The girl who was out cutting fence line on this farm at 9 years old did not grow up to become a parasite." Richard looked up at me, and for the first time I saw something in his face that was not anger or contempt. It was the hollowed-out expression of a man who had just understood the full weight of what he had thrown away. "Claire," he said, his voice barely above a breath, We didn't know. We couldn't have known. The $158,000 that saved the farm in 2020? I said. That was mine. I did it because my mother loved you. But that debt is settled now. I walked through the gallery and pushed open the heavy oak door at the back of the courtroom. Behind me, I heard Diane's voice. Claire. I stopped with my hand still on the door. I did not turn around. I know you're not a bad person, Diane, I said. You just chose the easier road. When you're ready for a different one, I'll still be here. Then I stepped through and let the door close behind me. The hallway outside was flooded with the kind of pale October morning light that makes everything look newly washed. After hours inside that fluorescent-lit room, it felt like surfacing from deep water. Nathaniel caught up with me at the elevator, straightened his jacket, and handed me my briefcase without a word of congratulation. Because people in our line of work do not use that word. The director wants a briefing at 0700 tomorrow, he said. He said you handled it well. I was just settling the accounts, I told him. I found my car in the parking structure, sat in the driver's seat, and looked at the bronze eagle insignia in the rearview mirror for a long moment. Then I unclipped it, opened the small black velvet case in the center console, and placed it inside. For 15 years, I had made myself smaller to fit the story they told about me. I had absorbed their judgment and carried their contempt as the quiet price of doing work that mattered. But as I pulled out onto the highway and pointed the car toward Langley, I understood something I had not fully allowed myself to feel before. I was no longer a ghost in my own life. I was the one holding the pen, and the next chapter was mine to write. Never let someone else's version of you become the story you live inside. The strongest people are often the ones you never see, until the moment they decide it is time to be seen.